In this tutorial, you're going to learn how to create this shader that's going to take a sprite and turn it into grayscale colors. If you want to get the assets along with the starter project, take a look at the link in the description and let's get started. So first of all, let me quickly show you what this example project looks like. All I have is a 2D platformer character that can run and jump along with the tile map and the background. So you don't need to understand any of this. We're simply going to focus on creating the grayscale shader. So first of all, we're going to create a sprite 2D here. And we're going to use one of the assets I have here in the file system. There's a folder called other and I have a bunch of different assets there. I think I'm going to use the spike head perhaps. Let me see what this looks like. Actually, I might just use this sprite of a trophy. I think this one's going to work. So let me just scale it up a little bit. We'll scale it up by 3 and we're going to place it on the ground. So we're going to turn this sprite into fully grayscale using a shader. Let's create that shader. We're going to go into the material, create a new shader material, click on it to open it up. Then we're going to create a new shader here. I'm going to call this grayscale and I'm going to place it into shaders folder. This is going to be a canvas item shader because it's a 2D shader. We're not going to use the template. We're just going to create it. After you create it, you can find it in the file system or you can just click on it in the inspector here in the material. That's going to bring up the shader editor. You can see that the type is set to be canvas item, just like we specified. Now we're going to create the fragment function because we're going to create this effect in the fragment shader. So what do we want to do in this effect? We want to take all of the visible pixels of the sprite and we want to turn them into a shade of gray. At the same time, we want to ignore all of these transparent ones. So first of all, let's get that out of the way. That's going to be simple. We simply need to get the original color of the texture in the fragment shader, and then we need to keep the alpha channel for the final color. So we're going to use the texture function with the texture and UV built-in variables. This is going to give us the color of the original texture for that pixel. We're going to save that in a vec4, and we can call this original color. At the end of the fragment shader, we're simply going to say color.a equals original color.a. Nothing is going to visibly change just yet. This is just going to make sure that we don't actually change these transparent pixels at the top. Okay, so to test if this is working or not, I can take the color and I can take the XYZ of the color and set it to a vec3 of, let's say, ones, which should make it white. And as you can see, it's working. We're only setting the visible pixels to white. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about colors, especially white, black, and gray colors and how they work. So for example, we can represent a color with a vec4 in Godot. Let's say my color. And if I set all of the channels to 1, this is going to be white. The first channel is for red, the second channel is for green, the third one is for blue, and the final one is for alpha, which doesn't change the color actually, it just changes the transparency. So let's focus on these first 3. You can see that for white, they're all 1s, which means red is full, green is full, blue is full. For black, they would all be 0. So 0 is the minimum value they can have, which is no color, and 1 is the maximum value they can have, which is maximum color. And if all of them, all red, green, and blue are 0, that's going to be a black, fully black. So we can actually test this by setting my color .xyz to the colors XYZ, and you can see that that's going to be black. By the way, doing XYZ is simply setting the first 3 properties of the vec4. So colors of vec4, we're setting XYZ, and we're taking my colors XYZ, which is these 3 right here. One cool tip is that you can also use RGB for these, and it's going to do the same thing, but the only difference is the naming. Now you can actually think in terms of colors, red, green, blue, which is kind of cool. So that is how to create black and white. And one thing you can, if you're paying attention, you can see is that all red, green, and blue are the same numbers for black and white. It's going to be the same for gray or shades of gray. We can use the same decimal number in red, green, and blue, and we can create any shade of gray. So instead of 1, we can do 0.5. Oops, don't look at that color, never mind that color. We're going to do 0.5 for every one of them, and that's going to create gray. We can do 0.8 for these. And that would be a lighter shade of gray because we're getting closer to 1, which is going to be white. We can go in the opposite direction. We can do 0.2, which is going to be a darker shade of gray. So that is how gray colors work. You need to use the same number for red, green, and blue, and you can basically use any value between 0 and 1, and you have literally infinite number of shades of gray in there. So now that we understand how we can create different grayscale colors, let's kind of strategize how this is going to work. So I'm just going to comment these out. We're going to take a look at the original colors of the texture. So what we want to do is we want all of these colors to be a different shade of gray. Because if we set all of them to the same shade of gray, then all of the texture is going to be very flat and all of this detail is going to be lost. Like the white highlights here, these darker spots, all of this color is just going to go away, which I can actually demonstrate to you. So let's just literally set it to be like that again. And you can see that, all of that detail is gone, but we want to keep all of that, which means we want to use a different shade of gray for each one of the colors we have in here. So for example, this white area is going to be a lighter shade of gray. This darker area is going to be a darker shade of gray, and so far and so forth, a different shade of gray for each one of these colors. How can we do that? There's an equation we can use to calculate this. Let me show you how it works. We can take any color. Let's say that we have a color that is 0.8 red, 0.6 green, and 0.1 blue. And then we have 1 for alpha. We can take the red, green, and blue. We can add them all together and get the average by dividing them by 3. And that's going to give us a single number. In this case, that would be 0.8 plus 0.6 plus 0.1, which would be 1.5. Then we can divide it by 3, which is going to give us 0.5. So we can get a number that's between 0 and 1 by getting the average of red, green, and blue channels. Then we can use this value as a shade of gray by creating a color that's going to look like this. 0.5, 0.5, 0.5 for red, green, and blue, and then 1 for alpha. We can use this grayscale instead of this number. So we can change this to this. And we can do this for each different color we have and get a different shade of gray. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement this. We can get rid of this my color stuff, and we're going to create a float called grayscale. This is going to be original color dot red, green, blue. Wait a second, we're going to actually add these together. So that should be a plus. And then at the end, we're going to divide them by 3 to get the average. And then we're going to create a color with these. We can actually create a vec3. Let's say grayscale color. We can create a vec3 of grayscale for red, for green, and for blue, just like that. And then at the end, we can say color.rgb equals grayscale color. And you can see that that is going to turn this image into grayscale. Each different color is now a shade of gray. Now we have a shader that we can use with any sprite that's going to turn it into grayscale. Let's create one more sprite. Let's use a different asset. Let's use the spike head this time. Bring it here, make it a little bit larger, and then we'll give it a material. And we'll give it the, let's see, let's load into the shaders folder, and let's use the Grayscale shader. And you can see that it's working for this one as well. And that's it. That is how to create a shader that's going to take a sprite and turn it into Grayscale. If you like this video, if you want to continue learning more about shaders and Godot, take a look at this one as well.